South Florida has hired 25 top hunters to capture and kill the snakes. A nearly 17-foot-long python was killed last week. Now, it is the longest captured so far in this program.
This is the 9th year state agencies have released eastern indigo snakes back into the wilds in the Florida Panhandle. Those 42 snakes were bred and hatched right here in Central Florida at the Orient Center for Indigo Conservation in Eustis. Florida decided to do something so wild that people literally laughed, mocked, and called it a disaster waiting to happen. They released hundreds of these rare, almost mythical snake killers into the wild. Sounds insane, right? Everyone swore it would backfire. But here's where it gets crazy. The exact thing people dragged them for ended up flipping the script and shocking the world. As of Tuesday, 50 pythons have been killed by the hunters. Florida's Wildlife Commission has also announced new prizes and plans to hire additional contractors to bliss python removal from state-managed land. What started as a joke turned into something no one saw coming. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story ends. Keep watching this video to find out. Come along. Why Florida was mocked, or its python strategy. When Florida first revealed that it was going to pay people to hunt invasive Bernese pythons, many people in the conservation world could hardly believe it. They wondered if this was really the kind of solution that made sense. After all, when had a state ever turned a wildlife problem into something like a paid gig? It almost sounded strange, even outlandish, but at the same time, there was no denying the seriousness of the situation. These snakes, which were not even native to Florida, had been spreading rapidly through the Everglades and wiping out local wildlife at a shocking rate. Birds, mammals, reptiles, even the balance of the ecosystem itself was being thrown into chaos because of these predators. So, what could Florida really do other than take a gamble on something bold, even if it made people shake their heads in disbelief? When you're faced with the slow collapse of an ecosystem, is it wiser to play it safe or to risk trying something unconventional that just might work? Florida's decision left many people laughing, mocking, and calling it outrageous. But the truth is, what came next was nothing short of astonishing. And trust me, you'll want to stay with me till the very end, for the twist that silenced the critics. The South Florida Water Management District took the first step in 2017 when it launched the Burmese Python Elimination Program. They did not open it to just anyone at first. Instead, they carefully chose 25 people they described as spirited individuals for what was supposed to be a short 3-month pilot project. It almost seemed like an experiment. Could regular people, motivated by payment and purpose, make a dent in this massive problem? These participants were promised modest wages, just a little above minimum wage at $8.15 per hour. On top of that, they could earn bonuses depending on the size of the snakes they caught. $50 for a python under 4 feet, and an additional $25 for every foot beyond that. In a way, the pay scale seemed like an odd mix of science, strategy, and incentive. Wouldn't anyone be tempted to aim for the longest snakes possible just for the extra cash? But then again, wasn't that exactly the point? Because the largest snakes were often the most dangerous to native wildlife. As the months went by, something surprising happened. This program, which sounded like a temporary fix or even a publicity stunt, actually began to gain traction. It did not just survive after the trial period ended. Instead, it grew. More contractors were brought on board. Payments were adjusted and improved, making the work a little more attractive and sustainable. Before long, contractors were earning between $13 and $30 per hour, while actively searching for snakes, and they still received bonuses for length. To sweeten the deal, they could also earn $200 for every verified active nest they destroyed. And anyone familiar with invasive species would know how significant that was, because every nest destroyed meant dozens of hatchlings prevented from entering the wild. Isn't it true that sometimes prevention can be even more powerful than cleanup? By the time the program reached its next stage, the scope was much larger. What started with only 25 hunters now had doubled to 50 contractors, each covering vast areas that spanned 9 counties across state, federal, and county lands. This was no longer just a quirky pilot project. It was now a long-term plan with real money, real manpower, and real results. The district even went a step further and added a new incentive, a $1,000 monthly bonus for whichever contractor caught the most snakes in that period. That meant there was now not only personal motivation, but also competition. Wouldn't such a reward push people to work harder, hunt smarter, and bring in more snakes than ever before? Looking back, the program's story is almost a reminder of how unconventional solutions can sometimes turn into the most practical ones. Who would have thought that paying everyday people to hunt snakes could help tackle one of Florida's biggest environmental problems? Yet, here it was, not only working, but growing into a serious operation with a structure that made sense both for the hunters and for the state. It also left many people reflecting on a bigger question. When traditional methods fall short, isn't it sometimes necessary to take risks and try something that sounds, at first, a little crazy? Because in the end, what mattered most was saving the Everglades and protecting its fragile ecosystem. And if that meant turning snake hunting into a paid job, then so be it. Public and media skepticism. When Florida first introduced its python hunting contests, many people did not hesitate to voice their doubts. Critics quickly said it looked more like political theater than any serious attempt at solving the invasive python problem. They felt that instead of being a real conservation effort, it was more of a show, a way for politicians to pose for cameras, or sponsors to flash their names, and for everyone to act as if something big was being done. But was it really making a difference? That question came up again and again. Reporters covering the events often wondered out loud if amateurs with little training could ever hope to control such a massive and destructive python population. The numbers from the hunts seemed to back up those doubts. In 2013, during the very first Python Challenge, the hunters managed to bring in only 68 snakes. Later events did not look much better. For example, in 2022, about 600 participants joined in over 10 days, and together they caught just 223 pythons. When those results were compared to what professionals could do, the difference was striking. Retired Florida biologist Don Schmitz said in very clear terms that the contests were not making a bit of difference in the bigger fight against pythons. He explained that these hunts gave the public a sense of excitement, but did little for long-term control. And the numbers supported his point. While hundreds of challengers worked hard in the contests, official contractors working with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission were bringing in far higher results. In fact, in a single month, these contractors captured 307 pythons. That was more than what all the challenge participants combined could collect in 10 full days. So, people naturally began to ask, if professionals are this effective, then what was the point of staging these large public hunts? Were they more for awareness than actual impact, or were they meant to simply grab headlines? Observers often commented that the events looked more like festivals or publicity stunts than genuine conservation strategies. Some people even questioned whether the time and energy spent on organizing such contests could have been better invested in training more contractors, using better tracking methods, or supporting scientific research on python control. They also pointed out how the python problem was far more complex than just catching a few hundred snakes once a year. After all, these invasive reptiles have spread across the Everglades for decades, reproducing at fast rates and thriving in an environment where they face few natural predators. Could weekend hunters really hope to make a dent in such a problem? Even though the contest drew excitement, news coverage, and community involvement, the reality kept pointing to the same conclusion. The hunts did little to change the bigger picture. Yes, they brought people together. Yes, they made headlines. And yes, they made Floridians feel as though something was being done. But in the end, when compared to the steady and systematic work of professional hunters, the results showed only how little difference these public contests actually made. And that left many people asking the hard question that never seemed to go away. Was the goal to truly solve the python crisis, or was it to make people believe that something was being solved? Beyond questions of effectiveness, ethical concerns mounted. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, expressed concerns about humane euthanasia methods, stating that the true test of a civilization is whether it can solve its problems humanely. PETA advocated that pythons should only be killed using a penetrating captive bolt gun or gunshot to the brain. At this point, the story takes a sharp turn. While many thought the solution was simple, just kill the pythons, not everyone agreed. Some conservation experts stepped forward and argued that this brutal approach might create bigger problems than it solved. They proposed something far more controversial: capturing and relocating these giant snakes back to Southeast Asia, where they're actually disappearing. But that wasn't the only concern. Amateurs joining the hunt caused chaos, from killing the wrong animals to destroying fragile nests. And just when it seemed complicated enough, an even bolder idea emerged: the strategy of releasing hundreds of rare snake killers. Keep watching till the very end to find out. The strategy of releasing hundreds of rare snake killers. The fight against Burmese pythons in Florida has turned into something far more advanced than people could have imagined years ago. At first, it was about hunters trying to catch as many as they could. But over time, experts realized that the snakes were far too clever and widespread for simple bounty hunting to ever be enough. So now, the effort has grown into a multi-layered battle that combines the natural instincts of the snakes themselves with modern technology. It almost sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? People often ask, who are these so-called rare snake killers? Strangely enough, the answer is the snakes themselves. Scientists have learned to use certain pythons, often called scout snakes or Judas pythons, as living trackers. These are usually male Burmese pythons that undergo surgery to have radio transmitters implanted in their bodies. Afterward, they are released back into the wild, not to roam freely, but to unknowingly betray the very species they belong to. The Conservancy of Southwest Florida, for instance, keeps track of about 40 of these Judas pythons at any given time. Each one becomes an unwilling spy. Among them, one snake named Luther has become something of a legend, as he has been tracked for more than 10 years and has led scientists to female pythons over and over again. Isn't it almost ironic that a python has become one of the most effective tools against other pythons? The way the state trains and deploys these scouts is quite fascinating in itself. Scientists do not simply pick any random snake and set it loose. Instead, they carefully capture adult male pythons, many of which come from programs like the Python Elimination Program. Then, after the surgical implant of a transmitter, these snakes are placed back in specific locations where researchers believe they will be most effective. But here is where things get interesting. The real power of the Judas pythons comes alive during breeding season, which runs from December to April. That is when males are naturally drawn to females because of the pheromones females release. By following a scout python, scientists can often locate entire breeding groups, sometimes containing up to 8 pythons at once. The snakes are, in essence, lured by nature, and unknowingly, they lead researchers straight to their own kind. It's almost like asking, what better way to track down a python than to let another python do the work. The science behind this strategy is surprisingly simple, yet deeply effective. It all comes down to the way these snakes behave during reproduction. Females give off sex pheromones that are irresistible to males. A study that followed 25 Judas pythons for 5 years found that in nearly 1 out of every 4 cases, a scout snake led scientists to new pythons. Each time that happened, anywhere from 1 to 4 more snakes were captured. While this may sound like small numbers at first, the impact is far greater than it seems. Why? Because many of those captures are breeding females. By removing a single female, scientists prevent her from laying potentially dozens of eggs, sometimes up to 100 at a time. Over the years, this method has kept more than 20,000 python eggs from ever hatching since 2013. That is thousands of future snakes that will never invade Florida's ecosystems. One might wonder, is that not a huge victory already, even if the process is more expensive than traditional road surveys? And yet, the fight does not stop with just snake spies. Technology has now been brought into the picture in ways that might make one pause and think, are they really using robots against snakes? The answer is yes. Florida has deployed around 120 robotic rabbits that act as decoys. These are not simple toys or stuffed figures, but highly sophisticated devices. They are solar-powered. They move in ways that mimic real rabbits. They release scents that smell like live prey, and they even give off heat signatures. From a python's perspective, these robots are as real as it gets. Each one costs about $4,000, which might seem like a lot, but when you consider their potential in trapping such dangerous predators, it begins to make sense. To make the plan even more efficient, these robotic baits are watched by video cameras with AI systems that can instantly notify officials when a snake comes close. Isn't it incredible to think that a predator as ancient and adaptable as a python is now being fooled by man-made machines? On top of this, scientists are also using near-infrared cameras that can detect snakes at longer distances than normal cameras, particularly at night when the snake's natural camouflage is less effective. When one steps back and looks at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that the battle against Burmese pythons is no longer a matter of chance encounters or luck. It is a carefully planned mix of biology, behavior, and technology working together. Some might ask, will these efforts ever completely rid Florida of pythons? Perhaps not entirely, since the snakes are already deeply established. But every captured female, every intercepted egg, and every deceived python scout brings balance back to an ecosystem that has been under siege for years. And maybe the real question people should ask is this: if humans can learn to turn the very instincts of an invasive predator against itself, doesn't that show that nature and science, when brought together, can create solutions that are as surprising as they are effective? The unexpected results that changed minds. For years, many people doubted Florida's bold and unusual approach to dealing with the invasive Burmese python problem, and some even laughed at the idea of holding annual python hunts as a serious solution. But now, the results are speaking louder than the skeptics ever did. The strategy that was once mocked has turned into one of the most remarkable success stories in wildlife management, and it is transforming the future of the Everglades ecosystem in ways that no one could have predicted. The numbers alone are staggering. In the 2025 Florida Python Challenge, a record-breaking 294 Burmese pythons were removed, setting a new standard for what determined people can achieve when they rally behind a common cause. Since the year 2000, more than 22,000 pythons have been eliminated from Florida, and just in the last several years, state contractors have taken out more than 14,000 on their own. When the Conservancy of Southwest Florida reported that they had removed 20 tons of pythons from the western Everglades, it made people pause and ask themselves, how much damage would all those snakes have done if they were still out there? The impact is not just in numbers, but in the life that is slowly returning to places where the snakes once seemed unstoppable. People often wonder if efforts like this really make a difference, and the answer, according to scientists, seems to be yes. Areas where snake removal has been most concentrated are beginning to show signs of recovery. Native wildlife, which had been declining for years, is starting to reappear. Researchers are finding fewer of the massive female pythons that once dominated the landscape. Why does this matter? Because every time a large breeding female is removed, thousands of potential python eggs are prevented from ever hatching. In fact, estimates suggest that about 20,000 eggs have been stopped from entering the ecosystem simply because those females never got the chance to reproduce. That is not just progress. It is protection for countless birds, mammals, and reptiles that call the Everglades home. The shift in how both the public and experts view this program has been dramatic. What was once dismissed as little more than a publicity stunt is now being hailed as perhaps the most effective management strategy ever attempted for the python crisis. Participation from the public has skyrocketed too. In 2025 alone, 934 people signed up for the Python Challenge, a sign that Floridians are not only aware of the issue but eager to be part of the solution. After all, who would have thought a competition could inspire such widespread involvement in protecting an ecosystem? Yet, here it is, working better than anyone imagined. The stories coming out of the field make the results feel even more personal. Take Donna Khalil, a professional hunter who managed to capture 56 pythons during a single challenge. Think about that for a moment. One person, in just one event, removed dozens of snakes that might otherwise have gone on to consume countless native animals. It puts into perspective how much one person's effort can matter when it is part of a larger collective push. And it raises a simple but powerful question. If one hunter can make such an impact, what does it mean when hundreds join together? The python problem in Florida is far from over, but the tide is finally beginning to turn. What once felt like a losing battle is slowly transforming into a story of resilience, creativity, and small victories stacking up. Instead of wondering whether the challenge even works, more people are now asking a far more exciting question. Just how much more can be achieved if this momentum continues? That mindset shift alone may be one of the greatest successes yet. And if you stick with me until the end, you'll see why it changes everything for wildlife management. What this means for the future of wildlife management. Florida's Python program has often been spoken about as one of the most fascinating examples of how a controversial idea can grow into something far bigger than anyone first imagined. People remembered how, in the beginning, the idea of managing giant snakes that had taken over parts of the state sounded almost like a desperate experiment, and many doubted whether it would work at all. Yet, over time, that very experiment grew into what many now describe as a conservation blueprint. A model that continues to inspire discussions on how to handle invasive species in other corners of the world. Wasn't it interesting, they asked, that something once laughed at as unrealistic has now turned into a success story that scientists and policymakers often point to with pride? The lessons learned from Florida's approach became clear as the years passed. Observers explained that the Florida Python Control Plan showed everyone that no single solution was enough to tackle such a massive challenge. Instead, they discovered that combining several strategies was the real key to success. They pointed out how the plan worked in two directions at once, focusing on both eradication and education. And they said this dual strategy turned into a guide for other states and even other countries facing invasive threats of their own. People stressed that the most powerful lesson from the program was that innovative solutions, even if they sounded unusual at first, deserved serious consideration, especially when the older, traditional methods simply could not keep up. After all, how else could anyone move forward, if not by trying something new, when the old ways had already failed? The creation of the Python Patrol program further showed the value of early detection and rapid response. Many experts highlighted how the program taught them that it was not enough to only remove the species once it had spread too far. What truly made a difference was having people ready and trained to spot problems early on, so that quick action could prevent much larger disasters later. One might ask, doesn't that idea apply to so many other problems in life as well? Catching an issue while it is still small before it turns into something impossible to control? This, they noted, was one of the most practical and transferable lessons from the Florida case. When people wondered whether this model could be useful elsewhere, the answer seemed to be yes. Florida's willingness to rally its community, to build awareness, and to invest in actual removal programs gave others a clear example of how things could be done. Observers described how this framework offered more than just a plan for snakes. It became a kind of pathway for scientists, community members, and decision-makers to come together, share responsibilities, and act in unison. Many said that in a world where globalization has made it easier than ever for invasive species to spread, the need for such coordinated efforts has never been greater. After all, if Florida could create a system for managing pythons in its fragile ecosystem, why couldn't other regions apply similar methods to tackle feral hogs, destructive insects, or invasive plants threatening their own environments? In the end, Florida's Python program was seen not only as a response to a local crisis, but as an example of how humans can adapt when faced with overwhelming challenges. People reflected on the fact that at its heart, the program told a bigger story, one about innovation, persistence, and the courage to try new approaches even when many doubted the outcome. And isn't that, in a way, the very essence of progress? The willingness to test the unfamiliar, to learn from mistakes, and to build models that others can one day rely on? Through its bold strategies, Florida not only fought back against an invasive predator, but also gifted the world with a blueprint for facing similar battles wherever they may arise. But here's the twist many people overlook. The fight wasn't just happening in government offices or behind the closed doors of science labs. It was happening in neighborhoods, classrooms, and backyards, where ordinary people discovered that their voices and actions mattered. Curious children asked questions that sparked awareness. Volunteers gave time and energy when it seemed impossible to make a dent. Families turned conservation into a daily habit, and strangers united around a shared mission of protecting what they loved. The victories weren't only ecological, they were deeply human. And if you think that's powerful, just wait until you see how the role of public engagement transformed conservation itself in ways no expert could have fully predicted, and in ways that might change how you see your place in this story. The role of public engagement in conservation. He explained that public involvement was not just a supporting factor, but a powerful force that strengthened every single stage of invasive species management. It was said that when communities were brought into the process, the outcomes were always better, because there were more perspectives, more ideas, and above all, more trust between the agencies in charge and the people affected. After all, wasn't it easier for people to accept tough decisions when they felt that their voices were heard and their concerns mattered? He mentioned that programs like Don't Pack a Pest had shown just how impactful awareness campaigns could be, since they taught ordinary people how easily invasive species could be spread and how a little bit of caution could save a whole ecosystem. Similarly, exotic pet amnesty gave people a chance to do the right thing by surrendering pets they could no longer care for, instead of releasing them into the wild. And wasn't that a far better solution than letting another destructive species slip into an already fragile environment? In addition, Reporting systems such as ivgot1.org were making it possible for anyone with a smartphone to become the eyes and ears of conservationists, helping detect pythons and other threats early enough to control them before they spiraled out of hand. He stressed that the work was far from finished and that the next steps in python control were already being considered carefully by the Python Control Plan Work Group. According to him, they were looking forward to using tools that were far more innovative and effective than ever before. One of the most fascinating developments being explored was the use of AI-powered camera systems designed to tell the difference between invasive pythons and native snakes. He asked, wasn't it remarkable that technology could now be trained to recognize the slither of a python against the backdrop of Florida's wetlands? That kind of progress showed that science and community action could work hand in hand, with one offering advanced tools and the other offering a human network of support. He explained that none of this could succeed without constant collaboration, and that was why annual meetings were held to bring agencies together, to share updates, to address challenges, and to strengthen coordination. Wasn't it obvious, he asked, that fighting something as massive as a python invasion required everyone pulling in the same direction? He believed that each effort, whether it came from a scientist developing a camera system, a policymaker pushing for stronger regulations, or a resident reporting a sighting, carried equal weight in the bigger picture. It was said that this unity, this weaving together of expertise, vigilance, and public trust, was the key to protecting ecosystems from invasive species now and in the future. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.